Now that we've covered classes and generators, we're definitely starting to get into the world of really tough aspects of ES6. So like I said, we just saw generators. Now we're going to talk about another challenging topic of ES6, which is promises. So you might say, hold up right there, Stephen. Promises have been around in JavaScript for years now. Well, yes, promises have been around in JavaScript for years, but ES6 brings along with it a native implementation of promises. So if you're familiar with jQuery, Axios, Bluebird, or anything similar, you've been using implementations of promises that were written inside of third-party libraries, each of which had their own tiny little quirks. This time, however, promises will be 100% standard across browsers and libraries because we are using a native implementation. Now, if you aren't familiar with promises, don't sweat it. We're going to talk about promises from the absolute beginning. So, what is a promise? Well, before I answer that, I want to make something just extraordinarily clear about JavaScript. Okay, something just extraordinarily clear. In JavaScript, there is absolutely no idea of pausing execution of code. There's no such thing as saying like sleep 1000 milliseconds. When you execute some amount of JavaScript, your code is going to execute line by line with no pauses, no breaks whatsoever. There are ways to defer the execution of code with stuff like set timeout or set interval, but there's no statement like sleep 1000 to just pause on a single line of code for 1000 seconds, or excuse me, 1000 milliseconds. Anyways, let's check out this diagram. It's got 3 lines of code, which are these 3 rectangles right here, 1, 2, and 3. The first one, const URL at the top, is just assigning a string to a variable. So we can probably imagine that this line of code executes pretty quickly, like 1 millisecond or who knows, microsecond, whatever it might be, doesn't matter. Now the next line is an AJAX request. This is an AJAX request, which is actually an HTTP network request. Any operation that goes out across the internet at any amount of time will take a non-zero amount of time to execute. So this is where we literally go out to the internet, try to make some type of request, fetch some information, and then get a response back to us. And we can never ever predict exactly how long that time is going to take. So it's definitely going to take longer than 1 millisecond or microsecond or whatever it might be. We might say that, let's just say it's going to take something like 3 seconds, right? But I really don't know. I'm just arbitrarily saying maybe it takes 3 seconds. So this line right here produces our AJAX request, okay? Just to be really clear. At the very bottom, we would get a console log of something like undefined back from the request as it stands right now, right? Because we don't know what data is going to come back from this make request. It's going to take some amount of time to go out to the internet and get some data back, and there's no pausing between this make request line and console log.data. So the 2 lines 2 and 3 right here, are executed one after another, just instantaneously, like on the microsecond level. So by the time we console log data, we still don't know what data is. Our request is still pending out on the internet. So this is what promises are trying to solve. The situation in which we have some really long-running operation, and we want to access the result of that operation. Okay. Let me show one more slide here. This is what is really happening, what I really expect to have happen, especially when we start to work into or get into the realm of promises, So we first do our assignment to a URL that takes like, inconsequentially small amount of time. We make our request, which is going to take, again, maybe 3 seconds, maybe 5 seconds, maybe 50 milliseconds, I don't know. Our request is going to go out to the internet, and only after the request has resolved, only then, keyword here being then, do I want to somehow try to work with that data here, okay? So again, the main goal here is that JavaScript executes our code line by line with no pauses, but sometimes we want to wait for a long-running process, like a network request right here, to complete before we get access to a piece of data. So let's continue the next section and kind of tie this whole idea together and talk about some terminology around promises.